All right. So I'm going to be recording this session. So hello. If you don't know me, my name is Sara Abbitt. I'm the AmeriCorps Cape Cod member for the Chatham Conservation Foundation. And I'm going to be presenting my project on the Southern Pine Beetle and the research that I have so far. But yeah, so I'm going to share my screen. So just let me know if you're able to see it. Um, 1 second. All right, is everyone able to see this?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's get started. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the Southern Pine Beetle and its threat to Cape Cod. And its name in Latin means tree killer for a reason. So we're going to see why it means the tree killer. So we're going to be having a few discussion points. We're going to talk about what they are, how do we ID them, what are some other notable species to kind of touch on, and how do we control them. So this is the Southern Pine Beetle. The Southern Pine Beetle is a tiny, minuscule bark beetle that prefers pine and likes to burrow into pine, which then in turn kills them. So these bugs are very well known for killing acres of trees in a very short period of time, weeks in fact. So they're very dangerous to Cape Cod because of our very valuable pitch pine habitat. So this is what a forest can look like after a southern pine beetle attack. This is from South Carolina, and this is kind of where they're more native to. So this is where they're seen to be kind of at their worst, is in the southeast. Just a little bit of history of them. The southern pine beetle is native to the southeastern United States. Their natural range kind of goes from the tip of Florida all the way to about New Jersey. But pretty much when all of the original trees in the South were cut down in the 17 and 1800s for agriculture, this then in turn depleted the soil because they farmed it a lot and it stripped a lot of the nutrients. So the original hardwood forests that were cut down, many of them did not end up growing back. So in turn, a lot of pine and non-southern pine beetle resistant trees ended up growing in its place. And that's kind of when they started to become a pest, was in like the 1700s. So this is a map of the United States. And this shows also the range of the southern pine beetle, but also where they have outbreaks. So if you look, the kind of pale yellow is the biological range of the southern pine beetle. Now, biological range can mean a lot of different things. So this doesn't mean that there's necessarily outbreaks or huge infestations like in these areas. It kind of just means that like they can survive at very low numbers in these areas without even causing an issue. But then in some areas, they can be a very great issue. But it just kind of means like there's a presence of them. So there's that. And then if you look at these colors right here, so ranging from dark red to kind of a orange and then like a darker yellow, that shows where there have been recent outbreaks. These colors don't represent severity. It just kind of shows like what year these happened. So the most recent in this map would be 2021. So that would be the dark red right there. So those are the most recent according to this map. Okay, and then if you look at this graph right here, this shows the average temperature for winter in Massachusetts. These insects, they cannot survive above below 3 degrees Fahrenheit. So because it is getting much warmer, just on average, all over the state of Massachusetts and just everywhere in the world due to climate change, it makes it very much more possible that these beetles can survive in these, historically harsher climates. So it is really unfortunate that that is the case, because when you hit that 3 degrees Fahrenheit, that is when they crystallize and die, and it's a very instant, like very quick death. So it is very important because we're not reaching those low temperatures on average anymore. In fact, over the last century, there has been a 3.9 degrees Fahrenheit increase on average in the state of Massachusetts during the winter. So that definitely contributes to the issue. So this is a timeline of kind of when they started to leak out or venture north of their natural range. So in 2001, there were outbreaks in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. And if you know, New Jersey has a massive pine barren population. But it is kind of believed that they like jumped in a way and they got to the Pine Barrens, which then was very devastating. And then in 2014, it took them a little bit, but in 2014, there ended up being outbreaks on Long Island in New York. They believe that there was possibly a bit of a jump over across of the water from New Jersey to New York. And Long Island is still having a lot of issues today. But something to note is that a lot of the research that we're taking from is from Long Island, because we're seeing that a lot of the research from down south that has historically been accurate or has historically worked for the South has not been always the case in the Northeast. So we're taking a lot of what Long Island has done with prevention and management into our consideration. And then in 2015, there were small outbreaks in Connecticut. There were traps set in Massachusetts. 18 out of 30 of them had Southern Pine Beetles in them. And then there were small detections in Rhode Island, but nothing serious. But then as of 2022, they were seen as far north as they have ever been historically in New Hampshire and Maine. Now, these weren't outbreaks, these were just sightings and infestations. And then in 2023, Massachusetts had their first outbreaks on the islands, on Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. So, and this is just a map of Massachusetts to show where they were detected from 2015 to 2022. And as you can see, Cape Cod has quite a few set out. And I know that Cape Cod National Seashore has been doing quite a bit to deal with their issues that they're having up in Truro at Pilgrim Heights. And that's about as far north as you can see on Cape is in Truro. So yeah, so this is the issues that we're having with Massachusetts. Okay, and then if you wanted to know a little bit more about the outbreaks on the island, on Nantucket, they were found on Nantucket Conservation Foundation land. They were contained to a 13-acre pine stand, thankfully. And then the location is the Westgate entrance off of Grand Pasture of Barrett Farm Road. And then on Martha's Vineyard, they were in the Manuel F. Corellis State Forest in West Tisbury. So let's talk about the physical appearance of the beetle. So these beetles are extremely small. They are 1/16 of an inch by 1/8 of an inch, which is smaller than a grain of rice, as you can see. To the right is a black turpentine beetle, which is a beetle that is very well known to Cape Cod, and we're going to talk about them a little bit more later because they are often confused with the southern pine beetle and their effects on trees. So the life cycle of the southern pine beetle, they start out as an egg and they're white. The larva is crescent-shaped with a dark head that's usually red or brown. The pupa is bright white, and the adult is light brown to black. Now, I want to note this specifically because climate has a lot to do with how many live per year, it is seen in the South that more generations live because of the heat. Kind of meaning like there can be up to 9 generations in the South in a given year, but then in the North you can see like about like 1 to 3 typically, just because of how cold it is. So how do they select their trees? How do they know where to infest? The trees are harmed because of this. The females are what we often call the pioneer beetles. They're the ones that typically seek out the host tree or the original tree where they start their infestation. They typically go after stress trees, such as ones that were stricken by lightning, the ones that have disease, or in like an overstocked dense forest. Now what they do is they drill into the bark and they burrow into the cambium of the trunk. So like kind of like the flesh of the trunk. When they do this, they release a pheromone that attracts other beetles to the tree. That kind of lets them know that they're ready to settle and they're ready to have eggs. That's what the galleries are for. So they are obligate tree killers, which means they must overcome their host and kill the tree to successfully reproduce and to continue to build their community. It takes about 5,000 to 15,000 eggs in a span of 5 to 15 days to create an environment for a larva to develop. Now, this is if conditions are really perfect and they don't have as many predators and they can get to that amount, that they can get to that size of a population. This is when they start getting into outbreak numbers. And due to the faster life cycle development in the summer, that is when most of the outbreaks happen because of the warmth. So how are all the trees not dead yet, you might ask, if this is the case? These beetles are pulse eruptive, so they have very irregular outbreaks. They happen very fast with a high mortality rate, but they happen over like weird periods of time. Like there has to be the perfect conditions. There has to be like the perfect weather. There has to be very few or no predators around. They have to have a sickly tree, but like a whole group of them, and then they can get stronger. It's kind of like that to start out. And the outbreaks typically only last for 2 to 3 years, and they end because of a change in climate, predators, enemies, a loss of hosts. So it's all very like conditional. So in conclusion of that, because of their eruptive patterns and because of all of these natural factors, to factor in, it is, the trees are able to survive, even though many of them do die and many of them do become victims to the Southern Pine Beetle. Not every one of them goes because the Southern Pine Beetle is only around for a specific period of time. It's kind of like cicadas. It's very like they go through cycles of like not being very dormant, there's not very many of them, or they're just kind of laying low. And then there's periods of them being very aggressive. So it just kind of all depends. So signs of an infestation. You're going to see probably the first thing you're going to see are these pitch tubes. And they kind of look like popcorn sticking out of the tree. They're about the size of a dime. But this is kind of, pitch tubes are a tree's natural defense system against predators to push them out. And if you look really close at these pitch tubes, you can see the little insects on them. That is if they can, that's what happens when they successfully push out unwanted threats. So if the tree is able to fight them off, then they can tend to keep the populations low. But if there's enough of them and they get out of the sap, then, that's about all the tree has. And these are what the galleries look like. So they're S-shaped and they're very, very small. They're only like a few millimeters in size. And they're honestly, very neat looking and very intricate. And this is where they lay their eggs. And this is where they raise their young. And this is what attracts the males to the trees, and then so on and so forth. And now, other notable species. Now, I told you earlier that the black turpentine beetle would be brought up again because they're often mistaken for the southern pine beetle because they are very similar and they are more native to Cape Cod. So people are more used to seeing the signs of those, even though they're kind of confusing, but I'll try and help to differentiate. So we took this photo down at Barkley Pond Trail, which is a CCF property. This is a pitch tube made by a black turpentine beetle. Now, these are typically only seen about 15 feet, on the trunk, whereas southern pine beetles, they go all the way up the tree. These are about an inch or more in size, and they kind of are a lot goopier. They're not as popcorn shaped. But yeah, that's kind of the difference since they're a lot longer and a lot bigger. And galleries. These galleries are just not as pretty as the southern pine beetles. I'm going to be very honest. They're not as intricate. They're not as well crafted, if you will. They're much larger. They're about a ½ inch wide, so definitely way bigger than the few millimeter ones by southern pine beetle. And they're about 12 inches long, or up to 12 inches long. And they can have about 100 eggs in their galleries. And they're J-shaped rather than S-shaped. So they're not squiggly, they just kind of have a curve, if that makes sense. And this is kind of what the outside of a tree will typically look like when they're infested. And then other quick facts about them. They range from Florida to Maine. When a tree is attacked by this beetle, it usually takes about 3 to 6 months to show, whereas a southern pine beetle, you can see within a matter of weeks. And then these signs typically include the fading needle color or needle death, but also the pitch tubes and things like that. They will often become an issue after a natural disaster with stressed trees, such as a flood or a drought. And then the pitch pine is its primary host, but it is also known to infest Japanese black pine, Scots pine, and white pine. But they're not as big of an issue because they don't attack like acres or massive pine stands at a time. They typically go for like one or a couple sickly trees at a time, just like this photo here. Yeah, so it's just like the one single stress tree they typically go after. Now, what are some predators of the southern pine beetle? How do they keep lower numbers in some cases, but then, in other cases they don't? So these predators help to keep the populations down, but we can't fully rely on them to fight the battle for us, if you will. There's this beetle right here, this bug right here. Please forgive me for butchering this, but dubious. I'm not going to even try to pronounce the first part, but we have dubious, and there's many other species of dubious. They typically respond to the semiochemicals that the southern pine beetles give off when they attack a tree, so they can kind of sense when they're there. And they eat the adults, but it would be difficult to remove the southern pine beetle by introducing them due to the imbalance in generation and population. So they would really have to build up in population to be able to even take on the southern pine beetle in a mass amount. So we can't really rely on them to fight the battle. And then we have Medetra bistrata. They tend to paralyze southern pine beetles with their venom, which I guess in turn kill them. And then we have woodpeckers. Woodpeckers, they go after many different types of bugs. And this helps to impact the population of the beetle density. And then for prevention. So how can we try to prevent the southern pine beetles from attacking? We have seen that thinning and cutting down trees has been a very good way to prevent southern pine beetles and also to help fight an attack that's already there. So on Cape Cod and on many pitch pine forests, there tends to be a lot of tree density, like very unhealthy tree dense pitch pine forests. That's kind of what southern pine beetles love because they're stressed. And so in an effort to kind of also create distance between the trees because they communicate via pheromones and because there's more wind and there's more circulation between the trees, it makes it hard for the beetles to communicate because of the greater distance. So if you thin the trees, it makes the trees less stressed, also therefore makes them stronger, and it also makes it so that they cannot communicate with each other. So that's very important when thinning. And it was also seen with the Wortham National Wildlife Refuge in New York in 2015. They had this experiment where they thinned an area that was already infested, and they thinned an adjacent area that was not infested, just to kind of see if, it affected. And after 2 years of monitoring, they did not see any reinfestations on either area. So that was pretty good results, very interesting. And for prescribed burns are very important because it's good for pitch pine regeneration. It helps to create stronger, more biodiverse pitch pine forests. They help with habitat structure and biodiversity, but it also helps to kind of create the pitch pine dominance in a forest. For early detection, this is kind of what you do when you see a beetle or an infested tree. So trapping, and I really want to stress this. For trapping, you can only use it in early detection, not for an outbreak, because there's many reasons that go into this. First of all, the traps are kind of also hard to find. You have to special order them, and they're not cheap, but you also have to buy the pheromones that go into them, which is what lures the beetles in. You have to put male and female pheromones in it separately. So it's a very expensive thing, and you can really only use it for early detection because it doesn't like bring in hordes of them, if that makes sense. And then for management. So there's a few different types of techniques that you can use for removal. So you can do like a cut and remove type of method, and that's how it sounds. You cut and remove them, but then you take them to a mill, and they're typically used for the timber industry, wherever they can salvage. The cut and leave, sounds also how it sounds. The trees are left on site, and they can be chipped, or they can just be felled towards the center of each other. Cut and hand spray, that's kind of gone out of style because of chemicals. But it has been shown that permethrin and epinephrine tend to work. And then pile and burn, the trees are cut down, piled, and then burned. And I want to draw your attention to this diagram here. So this is a diagram this is the method that is often used in the South. And as you can see, the beetle is kind of moving in one direction. It's only moving to the right rather than to the left. So this really dead looking tree, that's the origin. So that's where the pioneer beetles went, to this original host. Ooh. Oh my goodness, sorry. So they started out at that one site. And then as you can see, they moved to the right. The red is the ones that are the ones that are already vacated. So they're already dead, but they were some of the original ones that were dead. The yellow are the ones that they're currently attacking. And then the blue is their freshest attack. And then green is the uninfested. So what they're doing in this diagram is they're showing this kind of buffer, almost like a moat, that they're putting around it to kind of save the other trees. It has been shown kind of on Long Island that they don't just move in one direction like they do in the South. They tend to move in more of a circle rather than in a straight line. So we're going to pretend that we're looking at kind of a different image. So if we make a buffer or like a moat around this whole area, then these trees in theory will be protected. And it has been shown to work because, like I said before, the beetles communicate via pheromones. So if they can't hear each other, I guess, or sense each other from the greater distance, then they tend to die anyway. So if you create kind of that moat, then you're going to help to preserve a lot of healthy trees, even if some healthy trees have to be sacrificed for the greater good. Okay, so what is Massachusetts doing about this? What are they doing about their outbreaks on the islands? So before the outbreaks, they were doing mostly monitoring and aerial surveys, very typical. But then after the outbreaks, Mass DCR announced in 2023 that they would cut down the infested trees to suppress the outbreak on Martha's Vineyard. And to quote this quote right here, the Sheriff's Meadow Foundation is receiving $75,000 in state funding to help prevent the spread of the invasive southern pine beetle on the island, end quote. So there are funds that are helping many different organizations to help to fight the fight. And I also have a list of different organizations that are helping with the southern pine beetle, if you would so like the list. But then also there's the possibility of removing and thinning infested trees in the early winter, which is typically when that is done. So pretty much what we're trying to convey is there's a lot going on with these beetles. There's a lot of issues and a lot of unknowns because this is as far north as they've really ever, as far north as their outbreaks have been. So it's scary. And we really don't know what to do because we have very old pitch pine forests, which we have learned very recently that our pitch pine forests are actually quite on the end, on their last leg. They're very old and probably very stressed as it is and overstocked. So honestly, if we had an infestation or an outbreak on Cape Cod, it could be quite detrimental, even though, it might not even be, it might be interesting to see because they're already on their way out anyway, I guess I should say. So trying to come up with methods to save the pitch pine forest is very important, but we also have to take into account that they're already old and stressed pitch pine forests. So, but if we all kind of work together and we come up with ideas or some solutions to help to fight the southern pine beetle and to kind of help prevent it if possible, then I think that we could preserve our forests for as long as we could, because it is scary. Thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free. And also Julie is here to also answer some questions. And then these are my sources, and I'll be glad to send this PowerPoint out to anyone who is interested. And we'll actually be including it in the email following this presentation. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free.
I did just want to clarify one thing in case it was confusing, like, because at one point you compared them to cicadas. Although cicadas follow, I think they're on on a every certain number of years, which isn't necessarily the case with these beetles. But what we did want to emphasize in here, because we've given other presentations and people are like, well, how are the trees not all extinct? The beetles, they can exist at lower levels that aren't
dangerous or detrimental.
Huge amounts of tree death. Because they have pests and disease and stuff that they're up against as well. So sometimes they're in outbreak mode in an area and sometimes they aren't. So. All right, no questions?
No, this is Mike Jensen from DCLT. Just wanted to say thank you. Good information and appreciate you forwarding it on.
All right. Yeah, thanks for coming.
No problem.
So thanks also, Sophie and Doug. All right, I think we're good to wrap up then. Everyone, stay cool.
Yes, everyone enjoy whatever air conditioning you can find. But yes, thank you all for listening. I'm sorry if I scared you, because I've had that, I guess, effect on people in the past with this presentation. But just kind of take it with, I guess, as a learning experience of like, we just have to kind of try to prevent or try to manage. But yeah, so thank you all so much. I hope you all have a great day. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.